It's not enough. We have a gallery of villains to look out for, but now we could be infiltrated by a shape changer. I can't even tell if any of you are acting strange because you've been replaced or because this group is full of weirdos.
This was by far my most perilous review yet. Not because of anything the game does, but rather because of myself. Not to get too personal, but due to a scratch of ADHD, I find it almost impossible to revisit any game I have already completed for a full playthrough, at the very least. There are only 4 games that I have completed more than once, and 2 out of those 4 were completed a second time with friends, those being Halo 3 and Grounded. The only other games I've completed more than once are Skyrim, and the very game we're discussing today, Baldur's Gate 3. Some quick context. Larian Studios was most famously known for Divinity Original Sin 2 prior to Baldur's Gate 3, which was in early access for 3 years before its full release. Between the announcement trailer and the lack of microtransactions, the game was extremely anticipated. Upon its release, it had some minor bugs, and depending on who you ask, either a decent amount of performance issues in the third act or almost none. I personally experienced minor issues that I contributed more to my outdated computer rather than the game. The game reached critical acclaim and found great financial success. Several major patches have been released within the past year, introducing bug fixes, quality of life changes, UI fixes, added story, added dialogue, and absolute complete mod support to name half of it. When Game of the Year was being discussed, you had 2 sides, the people who weren't stupid and the people who have never played Baldur's Gate 3 before.
The year is Baldur's Gate 3.
Don't get me wrong, 2023 was a great year for gaming, and while I think these games were good, there was never any doubt to the vast majority of people that Baldur's Gate 3 would win, even if it wasn't their pick for Game of the Year. Now, I think I know the reason for this. I don't think it's because people actually thought Tears of the Kingdom or Spider-Man 2 were better games than Baldur's Gate 3, but rather that a third-person turn-based RPG shouldn't be Game of the Year. Here's the fairest way to put this. If this game was exactly the same but with first or third-person combat instead of turn-based, should it have won Game of the Year? Would it be the best game of all time? The answer is yes, but just because it doesn't have those things doesn't mean it doesn't deserve either title. Because if any game deserves those titles, it's Baldur's Gate 3. Now some personal context here. Around May, I got really into CRPGs and eventually settled on Divinity Original Sin 2. I got about halfway through the second act of the game before getting caught up with either work, life, or finishing Skyrim for the second time. But when the infamous trailer for Baldur's Gate 3 was released, I knew I was fated to get it. The trailer in question was famous for one specific moment. So when the game finally released, I did something rare and played a game on my laptop before my Xbox. This was unsurprisingly where all of my free time for the next preceding weeks went, and I'm not joking about that. My first playthrough ran me about 70 hours, which was about how long it took me to complete Elden Ring for comparison. My first playthrough was very much a completionist run. I didn't skip any areas, fights, or loot. I scoured the map very thoroughly, every single map, and the reason this playthrough was so fast was twofold. One, I was playing an evil playthrough and probably murdered my way out of 20 or so hours worth of quests, and 2, because I was running a Gloomstalker Assassin Rogue. Important to note that I was running this build before it was widely known about or adopted. Now that all of that context is established, hold on to your horses because I want to discuss 10 different points. My first game, my co-op game, characters, plot, gameplay, dialogue, build crafting, exploration, freedom, and co-op. Here's my gore smut confessional. I played the Dark Urge as a white dragonborn ward cleric named Achilles. After about level 5, I switched to a Vengeance Paladin, and maybe 30 minutes later I continued my playthrough as an Oathbreaker Paladin. The first act was simple. I killed the Goblin camp, wiped them off the face of the earth, no stealth, no poison, just about 2 hours of intense and constant fighting. I rescued Halsin, by accident mind you, and after exterminating everything in the Underdark, I smeared Mother Gothel across a wall and partied with the druids. After a night spent with Shadowheart, I moved to the darkest part of my playthrough, the Shadowlands. This was probably my biggest mistake in this game. Upon arriving at the sanctuary, I decided to side with Gabriel, just for me to not listen well enough and murder the cleric I wasn't supposed to murder. So I leave the inn just to fight both the vines, the shadow-infested inhabitants of the inn, and Gabriel himself. Somehow Jaheira believed me when I told her I didn't do anything wrong. Crazy, considering my white face was almost completely red. After a grueling hour or so of pest control, Jaheira joined me and we moved on. I went through the rest of the area, killed the good doctor, and met with Raphael again. We struck a deal and I proceeded to assassinate his demon buddy, barely making it out alive solely due to Astarion. After encouraging Shadowheart to decide whether or not she wants to kill the enemy of Shar, and reloading when she didn't, I forced her to kill her, and then I made my way to the Darkrise Tower. Turns out I missed the game's best cutscene, and I was instantly hostile.
Try again.
After another hour or so, I made my way over all the trash and into the basement. I have a strange approach to these games where I do the main objective last, and that led me through the prison to the Mindflayer colony. Now this is where you're supposed to be unable to enter until after confronting Ketheric on the roof. Since I was A, curious, and B, holding off on confronting him for last, I managed to Misty Step my entire party into the area that isn't supposed to be accessible yet. After walking past several areas that should have had fights, but don't since I broke the game, I found myself fighting Ketheric and his god. After once again surviving solely due to Astarion with some help from Holy Smite, I tried to enter the rooftop of the tower. Every time I did, I was put into combat with absolutely nobody, so I had to spend 6 turns walking my character to the chest and then back out. Then I proceeded to Baldur's Gate itself. Before I could get there, I had to save the Emperor, sleep with him, and then force every companion to take the enhanced tadpoles. I didn't have to, but this was an Evo playthrough, and flight is crazy helpful to have. Oh, it was also about this time that I spilled the beans to Jaheira about being a ball spawn, and how I butchered her friends. One turn and a Holy Smite later, she lay dead on the floor since she had 0 armor or weapons equipped, and I never leveled her up. Finally, at some point between now and the final stretch, I slept with Mazora.
I'm going to show you the true wages of your sin.
Primarily just to piss off Will, but also because why wouldn't I? Now I will admit this area was very overwhelming at first. Lots of people and not openly hostile at that. Outside of some frame issues in dense areas, it ran fairly smoothly. Let's see here. I destroyed the Steel Watch, saved everyone in the underwater prison, fixed the cursed mansion, killed Mother Gothel for good, and killed the Ancient Dragon in 1 turn. I'm not joking. 1 turn. You see, this is about the time when I hit level 12, and Astarion had 2 actions, 2 secondary actions, a free attack with Gloomstalker, was on a potion that gave him an extra attack and secondary action on top of that, got a free attack before initiating combat, and was standing in a sanctuary that allows secondary actions to be used as primary actions. So 8 critical attacks with the sharpshooter trait later, I was very satisfied with my build. This was when I finally managed to track down the local newspaper and the defining quote of my playthrough. The newspaper is running a smear campaign on me, and upon confronting him, he accused me of a few notable atrocities that I committed, and I'm given the option to tell him every single horrible thing I have done, and obviously I chose to.
The untold depravity, it is unprintable. I'll be out of syndication if I publish your gore smut confessional.
After enjoying his genuine appall at my actions, I butchered him and all of his employees before I changed the next issue to paint me as a savior to the lands. At Shadowheart's behest, I overthrew her cult. At Astarion's whim, I helped him replace Cazador and ascend to a supreme vampire. After a tedious trek through the sewers, Misk lay dead, and my pockets were bulging with the coin I took from his body. I hunted down Raphael and saw his final act ended in what had to be the best mission this game has to offer. Gortash fell in a single turn, and that left only my sister, my fellow ballspawn, and my betrayer. This was the most fucked up part of my entire playthrough. So when I stumbled upon the first crime scene, Well, I assassinated the detective and her escort, deciding that I didn't want anyone chasing after me. I took the list and misinterpreted it. You see, I thought I needed each of these people's hands, not that I just needed to catch the other murderer. So, I went to each name on the list and had a cloaked Astarion assassinate each and every one of those people from a distance before cloaking once more to loot their corpse. I did this 5 times. I was caught twice. The first time I managed to talk my way out of it. The second time I was caught in the middle of a party and unable to talk my way out of it. One fireball silenced those foolish enough to notice my crime. 2 turns and countless dead guards later, I made my way to the second to last name on this list. This is where I found the murderer and realized that I didn't need the other 5 hands that were in my inventory. I cut him down like any other adversary, and then finished off the last name on the list because nothing was going to change the horrors I had already committed. The Ball Tribunal told me where to find my sister, and I proceeded to kill them because her armor looked cool. I found my sister, killed her in like 5 turns because I was transformed into my Slayer form, a form which, while cool, does almost no damage next to my 23 strength, 20 charisma, maxed out paladin. With my father's approval, I proceeded to confront the Netherbrain. With my limited allies, I went forth to the final battle. I almost forgot to mention I did betray the Emperor, mainly because he kept lying to me and I was playing a character who definitely would not let that shit fly. After a short fight, mainly consisting of Will, unfortunately, Astarion, and Gale, sitting in a mine sanctuary that had an invulnerability dome on top of it, while my main character sprinted towards the finish line. The only ally I had kept all game fell nobly in this battle, and the only reason I didn't reload was because I didn't want him to suffer through my coming domination. In a plot twist that no one could have predicted, I betrayed Orpheus and took control of the Netherbrain for myself, thus ending my game at my rightful place next to my father, the Lord of Blood. This was a playthrough that I enjoyed significantly for the simple fact that I was not only allowed to do such heinous acts, but because the game encouraged me to play that way if I wanted to. I should mention that I did save scum. Not on most things, I had a rule. The rule was, if I thought my character should pass a check, then I would reload till he did. If my passive charisma is sitting at a 14, then I roll a 1, I'm gonna reload that shit. I wanted the game to tell my character's story, and so if I felt he should pass a check, then he would. For example, I once failed an intimidation check on a halfling NPC. There is no way a 7-foot-tall white dragonborn with black veins, red eyes, heavy armor, and blood covering most of his body would not intimidate most people. So, I reloaded, because to me the story of my character was more important than him giving me what I wanted because of my words rather than my sword. Truth be told, I murdered him anyways afterwards, just for the gall to require such a check, but that's not the point. The point is that Larian made it super easy to save and reload before any dice rolls, so that you can roleplay your character if you want, or just not fail if you don't want to, and that should be commended. Astarion never left my party a single time. He was both the most survivable and dangerous of my party, on top of being a treat to listen to.
I'm flattered, but I think not. It's not you understand. It's me. I have standards.
Most of the game I ran with Shadowheart for healing and Lae'zel for her tanky damage. Once I got to level 8 or 9, Gale replaced Shadowheart as healing was more efficient with potions and his damage was finally viable. At level 12 I cycled between Will and a hireling for either Eldritch Warlock or Way of the Open Hand Monk. This playthrough made me realize how undeserving Skyrim was of the title of best RPG of all time. Skyrim is great, don't get me wrong, but next to Baldur Gate 3, Skyrim just feels like it doesn't have a single choice for the player. It does, I'm aware, but Baldur's Gate 3 lets you do whatever you want in or out of dialogue. My second playthrough, I massacred both the Druid's Grove as well as a goblin camp with no real consequences. My point is that my first playthrough was more evil than any other evil playthrough in any other story game that I've played, and the best part was that I wasn't just choosing the dark side option instead of the light side option. I was actively choosing to do horrible things without being prompted. Here we arrive at my co-op game, or as I like to call it, the Chaos Run. I played this game once a week for about 3 months with 3 of my friends. I played as a bard, with a paladin, warlock, and a druid. 2 of the 3 people I played with did about halfway through our games together, managed to play through most of the game themselves, but in the early game I was the only one with experience. And man, was it something. To be clear, I tried to push us voting on dialogue options, with me staying largely out of it when I knew the outcomes. This, however, is when playing with friends can be both better and worse. 2 of our party kept wandering off to complete quests that they had done in their other games, get loot that they wanted, and initiate important dialogues with an extremely high charisma of 10. For reference, being a bard, I had 17 charisma, with bonuses in all of its subcategories. This was obviously annoying. They kept leaving the only player who hasn't played behind and wanted to be in more control even if it actively hurt the group. That being said, when someone you know goes down, it is way more impactful than when someone goes down in single player. In single player, it's more of, my DPS is down, or my healer is the first one dead again, what a shock. But when you're playing with friends, and frankly half of them suck at what they're doing, it makes it higher stakes and incredibly more fun. A battle that took me maybe 10 minutes in single player took us an hour at least. But it does mean that you can't crutch on one person as much. As you might have figured out from my first playthrough, I crutched on Astarion hard. He did a shit ton of damage, had 3 Misty Steps, maxed out tadpoles, and the Dark Urge cloak that makes you invisible after a kill. He was the last man alive almost every combat, and I did everything I could to keep him up. More often than not, Shadowheart would be surrounded by 3 guys, and I'd rather her just heal Astarion and soak up 3 hits, even if it meant she'd die. But when you're playing with friends, everyone has to be at least capable of damage in some way. The Paladin typically died fast, since he was always in the thick of it, and we didn't have a healer. The Warlock was made of cardboard, and the Druid didn't know what he was doing, and somehow almost always died first, which left me as almost always the last alive. Now, I chalk this up to my experience mostly, but also because College of Swords Bard has good survivability options. The point is, a last stand feels way more impactful when there's 3 people looking to you to survive, when they're also feeling the sweat of the situation. So when you succeed, they celebrate with you, and when you fail, they mourn alongside you. To summarize, when you play solo, you're playing logically. You know who needs to live and who needs to eat a fireball for the team. When you're playing co-op, you just can't accept people's deaths, even if temporary, because they want to play too. Multiple times in that game, we would spend rounds healing people for a measly 4 to 7 HP, or transferring health potions, or helping downed allies. When in solo, I would just have Astarion sprint over Shadowheart's corpse to backstab a dude, because I was playing for the win, not the team. There are 10 companions that you can get over the course of the game, with 6 of those being accessible within the first hour. That being said, I will cover all of the characters and my experience with them. I did not romance every character, and I did not do every quest line for every character, but I did watch some videos to fill in the gaps. That being said, let's go by the order you meet the characters in. Lae'zel is a Githyanki warrior who over the course of the game strays from her race's indoctrinated beliefs to her own benefit. Now, she doesn't lose ideals of what she was taught to believe, she just loses the assurance she has in its systems and leaders. She is very much cruel and apathetic when you first meet her, and for most of the first act, in fact. She frowns on weakness, but isn't necessarily evil, meaning she won't approve of you committing genocide just because they were a weak people. She just won't disapprove when it happens. This is definitely one of 3 characters who I would say actually grow and change significantly throughout the story, with her eventually seeing through the lies she was raised with and even being sensitive at some points. She is one of the better romance choices story-wise if you can get past her early game insults. Being an evil dirge, I didn't take her disrespect lightly, even if I did sleep with her. Shadowheart is a human cleric and a follower of Shar, the goddess of shadows, maybe? Shadowheart can't remember her childhood or her parents, and is basically as indoctrinated as Lae'zel, if not more so. Despite this, they both hate each other more than any other two characters. That being said, they always set up camp right next to each other. Shadowheart is pretty notorious for having the longest romance, or more plainly, you can't sleep with her till deep in the third act, and you have to do all of her questline to do so. Despite being my first romance, I found her to be incredibly dull. She just felt a tad two-dimensional, and I think part of that is because she's bordering on psychotic with the amount of apathy she generally feels. Essentially, her story revolves around the artifact that she's carrying, for reasons she doesn't know nor question. This artifact is what houses the Emperor and shields us from being dominated by the Mind Flayer tadpoles. Shadowheart is also struggling with her belief in her goddess Shar, which can either be reinforced or completely removed around the second act of the game. Gale is a strange man because of how ridiculously powerful he is lore-wise, despite being only level 1 when we meet him. Basically, he was romantically engaged with a smoking hot magic goddess, but then started envying her power, and eventually they had a falling out. Now he has a magical nuke implanted in his chest that he is supposed to use to blow up the Netherbrain, but will more than likely be encouraged not to by the player. Now, Gale is a very much fun-loving dude with the whole Jesus look going on, and while he is sweet, the only real depth to his character is his lust for power. He says he regrets what he did, but he doesn't, and given the chance, he'll take the crown of whatever to ascend to godhood at the end of the game. While Gale is certainly the most go-with-the-flow guy on the team, he will voice some disdain for casual murder. Astarion is an elf who just so happens to be a vampire spawn and an all-around dick. Despite this outright douchiness, he is the most well-known and probably most liked character in the game. I will admit to sharing this opinion. His story is essentially just him dealing with his daddy issues. He spends most of the game being dodgy about his identity and his past, choosing only to reveal information when either caught or when he trusts the player enough. Now, out of every character here, he is 100% the most evil character. He encourages genocide and has a general flippant disregard for murder that made him incredibly likable.
Can we kill them? Please. Pretty please.
Now, his quest's ending is much more important than most of the other characters because he either ascends or chooses to break the cycle. This choice is almost completely on the player and how they have affected him, because you can refuse to help him ascend but anger him enough that he departs your party permanently. If you are romancing him and not being downright evil the entire game, you can get him to turn down ascension and you get some brilliant acting. This won best performance for a reason, after all. Will is rather boring. I'll be honest, Will was and still is my least favorite companion. This is partly because I prefer playing evil playthroughs, and despite making a pact with the devil, Will acts like he's so high and mighty. So Will's story revolves around his pact with Mizora and his father, who is in a trance and then imprisoned by Gorath. I'll be honest, I saved his father because I wanted to do the mission, not because of him. And to be even more honest, the best part of his story was getting to fuck his patron.
I'm going to show you the true wages of your sin.
Karlach is the character I know the least about because I didn't use her a single time. What I do know is that she has an engine in her heart and it needs to be fixed, and no matter what, she goes back to Azarus when the credits roll. She was a legendary fighter or something, and Will was sent to kill her. That's what I know. Oh, and also Damien can fix her and make legendary armor. I never did either, since he was massacred at the inn in Act 2, but oh well. Karlach is one of the characters who will very much ditch your party if you do anything remotely evil, the most notable of which being the massacre of the Druid's Grove. Minthara is probably my second favorite character, despite the fact that I ran her through and never turned back. She was brainwashed by the Absolute, and upon being freed by the player on Moonrise, turns her back on the cult. She's evil and borderline psychopathic, and the only reason I would consider Astarion more evil is because Minthara's guilt is more freely given. Astarion feels very little remorse, even less so if not prompted by a light side player. That being said, there's nothing better than running around with her and Astarion and the constant encouragement to commit war crimes. Halsin is a druid who can turn into a bear for combat reasons. Yeah, basically Halsin is a nice yet boring guy. You only really get him as a companion if you save the grove and do some quests in Act 2. He, like the other callback characters, seem to be here more for fan service than anything else. Jaheira. Well, to be honest, all I know about her is that she leads the Harpers, and that she doesn't like ball spawns. To be fair, my lack of knowledge on her is just as much my fault for leaving her at camp till she decided she wanted to die, as it is Ilarian's for not making her a companion until Act 3. By the time the second act starts, you should easily be attached to 1 or 2 companions, if not more, and introducing a new one that much later just isn't the best idea. Mink. I know he's a character from a previous game. I know he's friends with Jaheira. I know he has a hamster, and I know that he didn't put up much of a fight. He's the only companion you have to actively search for, and then you have to free him from his mind control. If I remember correctly, you need Jaheira in your party to do this, which was unfortunate because her corpse was stuffed into a trunk in my camp when I met him. Before we move on, I would like to clarify that I think every main companion is not only fleshed out, but fun to be around. Minus Will. Fucking hate that guy. I was never annoyed by the characters I was surrounded with because even though they were annoying me, it was because they disapproved of slaughtering an inn full of innocent people rather than because of their personalities. All the characters felt real and unique with different opinions and reactions to things. All the characters had fun interactions between each other and felt like they existed for reasons outside of the player. Shadowheart and Lae'zel being racist and generally hating each other. Astarion always shitting on Gale for no reason.
I'm not interested in being in any love triangle that involves Gale.
Karlach not trusting Will because of Mizora. The list goes on. But the fact of the matter is, this is how you create memorable companions. You make them feel like they could exist without the player. Now, I'll run through the plot really quick because there is actually very little plot since the player has most of the agency. The game starts with the player waking up on a Mind Flayer ship that is under attack. We have a tadpole in our head that will soon turn us into Mind Flayer ourselves. We run into Lae'zel and Shadowheart and crash onto a beach. We wake up and within 5 minutes find Shadowheart, Lae'zel, Gale, and Astarion, before inevitably running into Will, who's defending the Druid's Grove from a goblin assault. We repel it and talk to the Druid Healer, who tells us that Halsin might be able to remove our tadpole if we can free him from the goblin camp. The rest of the story goes the way the player wants, but generally, you'll wipe out either the Druids or the goblins. You'll side with either the Absolute in Moonrise or the Harpers at the inn. And finally, you'll either stop the Netherbrain or control it. Those are the 3 main story beats of the game. That being said, there's hundreds of other stories, objectives, and quests to find. In fact, I'd argue that the plot of this game only serves to give an introduction and a conclusion to all 3 acts, with everything in between being filled by choices you make. For example, me choosing to control the Netherbrain at the end of my playthrough was nowhere near as important to my character as the butchering of the Baldur's Gazette or the casual murders I committed unnecessarily. It's all the moments in between the story that makes this game's story so good. Baldur's Gate 3 is the Lego of video games. It has structure and provides instructions, but never punishes you for ignoring them, and in fact, always seems to encourage you to do whatever you want. Baldur's Gate 3 is designed around D&D 5th edition and plays pretty much one-to-one with it. Every character gets a class, race, action, and bonus action, as well as their movement. The class changes how you play the game, ranged, close quarters, or magic, to name a few. Race provides a set of advantages and disadvantages in both dialogue and gameplay. An action is typically any spell or attack, while a bonus action is typically using a potion, item, or offhanded attack. The combat can, however, be much more complex and certainly far more intricate. As characters level up, they can either increase the level of their current class or any other class that they would like, allowing for multi-classing. This allows for some crazy gameplay combos, such as the Gloomstalker Assassin I mentioned earlier, and his 8 consecutive attacks. Now, I won't go deep into the rabbit hole of what you can do, since there's gameplay being shown anyways, but for the most part, you can do whatever it is you want. This game is all about freedom of expression, whether that be in combat, gameplay, or conversation. I've seen people carry around explosive barrels in a chest and just throw the chest at enemies just so they can light it on fire for a makeshift nuke. I've seen a guy whose entire character was built around throwing dead bodies at enemies. You can even throw your teammate if they can't get close enough to attack. If you can imagine it, you can likely do it. As for how the combat works, it's rather simple. Once combat is initiated, a turn order is given based on each individual character's initiative. This is typically just who has the highest dex score. Each character gets to take an action, bonus action, and move 25 to 30 feet depending on their race. They can end their turn at any point, regardless of if they have done anything, and then it goes to the next character in initiative order. This repeats till the combat is over. It's simple to learn, hard to master. The more you play, the more options you have in both class creation, armor, and weapons. It creates a system that rewards you for piecing things together and punishes you for not paying attention. Some characters are completely immune to certain types of damage and extremely susceptible to other types. There exists a wide variety of effects that can be applied on both enemies and allies alike that can drastically change an encounter. There's a spell that creates a dome of silence, eliminating the ability to cast spells inside of it, or an area of effect spell that rains daggers. Friendly fire is very much a concern, especially when you have a fireball mage on your squad. More often than not, I found Gale being surrounded, and since he has the durability of the second tower, I usually watched him gloriously cast a fireball at his feet, taking as many with him as he could. Let's ever so briefly cover the dialogue and the many options that are open to the player. Every time you talk to almost any interactable NPC, you have access to multiple different trees of dialogue with additional options being granted by your race, class, perks, tadpole powers, quest-related knowledge, or companions. Now, Baldur's Gate 3's script has 1.9 million words, and there are 140 hours of cutscenes. For reference, I haven't cleared 140 hours of playtime between my original playthrough, my co-op run, and my second game, in which I've just now completed Act 1 in Tactician mode. This game is incredibly deep in just the dialogue and cutscenes alone, and you can easily avoid multiple conflicts with words by themselves. And to be clear, the dialogue isn't even close to bad. In fact, most of it is so well written and delivered that you'd expect this to be the work of a far more mainstream studio.
We kill Gortash, or Gale dies. It is not an easy call. On the one hand, killing Gortash would be fun. On the other, Gale can be very annoying. We probably should save the wizard, though. He does have his moments.
I found myself genuinely laughing at some of the banter and actually caring about the characters when they inevitably got the catharsis that they had been searching for. There's nothing I can say or show you in an hour that would accurately encapsulate the day's worth of quality dialogue that this game has. But let's be real, this game is a year old, and Game of the Year. If you're watching this video, you likely already know it's good. You've likely experienced it yourself. The writing in this game is of a quality so rarely seen, especially on the absurd scale that it's on. Now I am, unfortunately, not as familiar with D&D 5th edition as I'd like to be, so I'm not 100% sure on how much was changed between that and Baldur's Gate 3, but I do know that it is a tad less strict on the rules. Regardless, multi-classing is amazing. Being able to create absurd builds was crazy fun. By level 12, it was basically a requirement to put 2 levels into Warrior just for action surge on every character I had. But then you get into the more complex stuff, like having a monk with Thief just for the extra bonus action, and Warrior for action surge, and so on. The point is, this game and its flexibility is incredibly fun. I loved when I got to max level and just got to completely overhaul my classes and the playstyle. Thankfully, you can respec as many times as you want for a relatively low cost. Unfortunately, you can't access your inventory screen to see what your character has as active perks if they were For example, there are a pair of gloves that set your strength to 23 regardless of what it is before. But if you forget that you have that on, because let's be honest, you have so many buffs and perks at that stage in the game, then you have to restart the respec. But I'd rather it not be super helpful and only cost gold, rather than the Elden Ring version, which has a limited number of respecs and also no way to check your inventory screen. Between the 12 classes, 46 subclasses, and mod support, you will never run out of ways to change up your character. Sure, some things are better than others, but one of the most efficient builds in the game involves enlarging an owlbear and having him fall from as high up as possible. Then there was a build that involved using a niche weapon that deals extra damage depending on how much gold someone is holding. They would sneak behind an enemy, plant 15k on them, and then one-shot them. Hell, I've seen a paladin do over 200 damage in one attack. You can do whatever you want in this game, regardless of if it's logical or not, and more often than you'd expect, you can make a decent build just by winging it. A build around throwing weapons that return to you, for example, or having an army of undead mushrooms. If you can dream it, you can most likely do it. Now, the exploration in this game is ridiculous. There are so many hidden areas, items, quests, and information that it's almost impossible to find everything. Did you know that Kaga is a shadow druid? If you find this out, you can use it to either justify murdering her or to convince her to turn back on her ways. Then there's an entire 3-act long quest to unlock the secrets of necromancy. This involves several hidden areas, and despite the hoops required, the reward was worth it. It got nerfed not long after the game launched, since it was definitely too good at the time. But the point is, they didn't have to add that. There are numerous maps under or above other maps, such as the Underdark and the Gauntlet of Shar, to name a few. There are hidden bosses, legendary weapons, and optional areas that can be accessed by turning statues, lighting torches, or just having good perception. There's never a point in this game in which you will find yourself unable to go somewhere that you want to. The upper city of Baldur's Gate would be the only place I can think of, but given the scope and scale of the game I had already explored, I didn't feel anything but understanding for its exclusion. Act 3 is massive already without adding a whole new map to it, yet alone the secret areas they would inevitably include. I remember when the game first launched, there was a video of Matt Mercer stacking like 100 odd boxes on top of each other and leaping to the top of a castle.
Just teleport myself on the other side. Look at that, on top of the counting house.
That is...
The fact that you can do something so stupidly impractical and have it work is proof that this game is amazing. They don't make games like this anymore. In today's era, games have invisible walls and kill barriers littered around the world that prevent you from exploring. There aren't many games that even come to mind without this restriction. Bungie's Halo, anything made by Rockstar, and Elden Ring are the only ones I could think of in the whole minute I stopped to think about it. At some point you have to understand that we don't care if there's nothing out there. We just want to go there because we can go there. Think about the outskirts of Sandtrap in Halo 3. You can go there. It's dangerous, sure, but not off limits, and people loved it because it was discouraged from being explored, but not unallowed. Now, I won't spend too much time on the topic of freedom since I've inevitably covered it already. You know how some games won't let you harm children? Not this game. You know how most games are censored for the eyes but not the ears? Not this game. You know how some games won't let you kill important characters? Not this game. Do you want to collect the bodies of people you kill like a psychopath? Have at it. Have you ever wanted to execute someone for cashing checks that they can't write? Enjoy. Have you ever wanted to fuck a bear? Yeah, I haven't either, but when I was given the option, I didn't say no. Want to convince someone to kill themselves? You got it. Pull a Homelander on a bunch of hippies? Say no more. Have tentacle sex? I guess it's not quite sex, but it has tentacles. The conclusion is simple. If you want to do it, odds are you can, no matter how sick and twisted it may be. You can kill the little druid girl and beat her parents to death with her corpse. I would never do that, of course, but the option remains. Now, I touched briefly on my co-op gameplay experience before, but I really want to focus on the co-op systems. The combat plays out the same, just with people playing their own character rather than everyone in the party. which is pretty straightforward but must be said. The exploration is unchanged. Everyone can go anywhere on any of the maps with no regard for where everyone else is. It's a shared loot pool, and there is an inventory lock to prevent loot goblins from taking shit without asking. You can listen to other people's conversations, and by extension view their cutscenes, if enabled. And in fact, I only really have one complaint about the co-op. Conversations that are initiated by NPCs will always be initiated with whoever gets within range first. The problem with this is that not everyone has the same charisma or persuasion stats. Furthermore, I don't love how most conversations are between just the player and the NPC. I wish there was a way for your companions, single player or multiplayer, to contribute to the conversation. In some instances, a NPC companion will be a part of the conversation and will chime in, but those are mostly in story-related situations rather than generally. Now, this is a complaint from a perspective that doesn't understand how difficult this would be to add in on a greater scale. That being said, I do understand that this would be ridiculous for both coding and writing, and even then I don't know if it would even be feasible to add. At the very least, I would like to see the option to switch who gets pulled into conversation to a certain player if they're within a 10-meter range of the player who initiated the conversation, or something like that to make it feel less like everyone has to follow the bard around the map. This was a long video, and the vast majority of it was positive. That says a lot about this game. If you watch my other videos, you'll know that I am very free with my criticisms. So I want to make it clear that I truly love this game and believe it to be the greatest game of all time.